at so I'm just going to kind of run through this fairly quickly, and then that might give
speaker view.
so I'm a crossing compliance specialist, going on 16 years with ODOT and the rail crossing.
My video's off.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, people just popping in. I think that's what we're hearing.
Okay. And I'm a Federal Railroad Administration certified crossing inspector. So we have ORS 824.202 authorizes and vests the authority to regulate rail crossings within the state of Oregon to the Oregon Department of Transportation. And it also mandates that we eliminate crossings at grade whenever possible. So we are trying to close crossings whenever possible. The process to construct, alter, or close a crossing, basically you identify a project. So if a city, a county, a road authority thinks there's a project and it's going to be within 500 feet of a crossing, then they should contact us so we can have an opportunity to weigh in to see if it needs to be a ODOT rail crossing project or it might not be. We say 500 feet because it's actually based upon the safe stopping distance, and that varies with the speed limit of the road, and most people don't know how to figure that out. So we just say 500 feet because that will capture every crossing. So if you're doing any public work, driveways, adjoining streets, any road work within 500 feet of a crossing, you should contact our department so we can weigh in and say, yes, that's going to need a crossing order, or no, it's not. But at least we figure it out before, because once the shovel goes in the ground and we find out, it really complicates things. So the more notice we have, we can weigh in and say if a project is required or not. And the person to do that with is our manager right now, Chris Malm. And I have his contact information that I can forward on if need be. So once a project is identified, once we say, yes, there needs to be a rail crossing project, we set up a diagnostic meeting. And the diagnostic meeting is with all parties. So ODOT, rail crossing, the road authority, and the railroad. We have preliminary plans provided by whoever wants the project, and that party sets up the crossing project, the diagnostic meeting. We attend on site at the proposed area for the crossing or at the crossing. We discuss the scope of the project, who will be responsible for what, different parts of the construction, and who will be paying for what. We'll get a rough timeline. We'll talk about the safety requirements, what kind of equipment upgrades need to be made, any additional signage, right-of-ways, any specific construction requirements for the crossing, either by the railroad or by the road authority. Then the next step is for parties to do their research. Maybe they might have to investigate right-of-ways, try to find funding, anything that the preliminary work for a project. After that is settled, then whoever wants the party would make an application. The only two parties that can make an application are the road authority or the railroad. And once they make that application through our website, they would include engineered plans, and that starts the order writing process. And that the application has to be signed by someone in the organization authorized to obligate funds. So after the application is received with the ODOT Rail Safety Section, we build a draft crossing order, and that's called a Notice of Proposed Rail Crossing Alteration and Notice of Opportunity for Hearing. We just call it an NPA because that is a lot easier. Once that NPA is written by us, the NPA and the engineered plans and the application are sent to all the parties, the road authorities, the railroad, and any other interested parties. And they have 30 days to review and comment on that draft. During that 30 days, the parties can make one of three decisions. They can agree to everything and we move forward. They can object to the NPA and request a hearing, or they can reserve the right to a hearing and request a meeting to discuss issues that they may have with the NPA. So something comes up in the NPA and the city says, well, I didn't think this was going to happen. We kind of put a hold on things, we figure things out, and then either move forward. In 16 years, we've only had 2 hearings that I know of. If the owners agree, a final order is written, and then that authorizes the work to be done. If a hearing is requested, a civil law judge will decide if the project is required for the safety of the traveling public, and that judge will settle any issues. After construction is completed, ODOT Rail Safety inspects for compliance with the crossing order and either finalizes the order or fails it. If it's failed, then the party responsible for that part of the order has to fix their part of the agreement of the construction to be able to move forward. And then one last note, Section 130 funds, and that's federal funds that we get every year at this crossing safety section. They're available for safety improvements, depending on how much money we have in the bucket at the time. It could be, a few $100,000, it could be a few million, depending on what your project is. There's a match that has to be done, but that's all outlined. If you just Google Section 130 railroad funds, it outlines everything. But we do have federal funds available that we can direct towards safety improvements at rail crossings. So basically, that's what the order, the process is to get a project at a railroad crossing. Are there any questions?
Well, I'm just going to start off, and I thank you very much, Kurt, for being here, because I think I was one of the drivers of getting you here. And that is just, I just want to say that our particular area is very frustrated with the not being able to get in touch with the railroad on various projects that we have moving forward. And so things just stop. So I particularly asked our people to say, okay, give me some examples of issues that we're having. And so I've got like 3 things that are specific. One of them, a bicycle crossing that the cost should be around 50,000 and ends up being 300,000, and so it's can't be fixed. So it just throws everything in a community off. Anytime we have to go to the railroad, you can talk to anybody in our community who deals with transportation, and what their comment is, if we have to go up against a railroad, everything stops. And I guess that's my frustration from a community member, that there are some, especially when you're going for bicycle crossings and when you're trying to get things in the community moving forward, and then they just stop. So I've been told that the railroad is private. Is that correct? Can you explain to me how that works and why they are able to just not contact and get back to you if you're looking for communication to get a project done?
Well, you're correct. They are private companies. They have certain regulations that they follow, mainly federal regulations set up by the Federal Railroad Administration. But none of those regulations say that they're obligated to return calls. And that doesn't just go for you, it goes for us too. We are constantly frustrated that we can't get, we regulate them and they stonewall us. So it's an ongoing, constant, and it's a problem that I have seen since I've been here, and it's only getting worse, to be honest with you. So we have a new manager, Chris Malm, and I'll send Kelly my notes that have his information. And as of right now, he's kind of the go-to person. If you're having issues, he has a little bit more weight than I as far as trying to budge the railroads. I mean, I have some influence because I can I can write them up on deficiencies and defects and violations. But you know, they really flaunt their, you know, that they're being kind of above the law in some ways, because a lot of the laws are preempted by federal law, some of our state laws. So it is frustrating. We feel that same frustration. But if you have specific cases, the best person at this time to reach out to is our manager, so he can try to break those that communication deadlock down. And also, you know, if there's a specific project that's already been identified, if there's a project manager here with the ODOT crossing section, that person can also help. But it is frustrating. I agree, but it's the reality that we deal with on a daily basis.
Well, yeah, and like I said, it just kind of seems with all of it, because when I brought it up at one of the MRMPO meetings when I was just like a newbie, it was just like everybody said, yes, this is truly an issue. So it seems to me that if it's truly an issue throughout, you know, you're saying not just the state, but the country, that something should be done, because it's, like I said, simple projects come to a halt, you know, and, you know, they have like right-of-way, huge right-of-ways along that we try to contact somebody and they just write you off. And it's just, like I said, it stops communities from being able to get simple projects done. And there's got to be a way to somehow come together as a group to say, you know, it's not just us, it's everywhere. And how can that change? Because we can talk and pass laws and do all these great things, but when it comes down to put a basic crossing in, to put a bicycle route in, and you can't do it, it stops everybody dead center in their tracks. So I want a connection and a way for us in mass to be able to, you know, have a listing of issues. And yes, I would appreciate the name of whoever, so that I can send the specifics that I got on from our engineer, transportation engineer. So anybody else want to add to that? I don't want to be the only person, you know, complaining.
If you're not talking to the right person, you're not going to go anywhere either.
Yeah.
You know, we have contacts that we use on a regular basis that we're more than willing to share with you. Like where are you, Valerie?
I'm down at Grants Pass, Southern Oregon.
You're dealing with the Central Oregon Pacific Railroad.
Well, there's one of them that we're dealing with, which is clear back in Florida, that we have a group who's putting in a homeless shelter, and they're looking for a little bit of right of way along a railroad, and they've just been run all over the country. Right.
So that's the Wyoming Railroad. They own the Central Oregon Pacific Railroad.
Okay.
And they are very difficult. I agree with you.
Yeah, so I would appreciate if you could get that forwarded to me. That would help me. And then I will also, I see Steve Moe has his waving his hand at me, so I will let him say something. And if anybody else has something to add, I see Mike and Pat after that.
Two things. I believe the railroads got their rights back in the original land grants. They were given all kinds of every privileges, and so they backed off on some of them. But as far as their right of ways concerned, they own that, and they have nobody can go over that. So that's it. They don't have to do anything for us. I have worked with Southern Pacific years ago, and same problems back then. In that day we did have a contact in Portland, which really worked, but I don't believe that's probably not the case now. But if we can find somebody like that, Union Pacific, that might help us. One last thing is, has anybody ever seen a train actually hit a car? I have. It is ugly. People weren't in it. They got out of it, but boy. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Pat, go ahead. Fifth County.
Yeah, Kurt, I guess I'm looking for a little advice. We've got a long delayed Corvallis to Albany multimodal path, and at the Albany end, we would like to go through a trestle, and there's been a path there for decades, and I believe that's UP and negotiations and little communication back and forth. And earlier this year, after months of delay, they said, no, you can't do that. Do you have any, uh,
Recourse.
is that situation, would you recommend talking to Chris, your department head, or is this a different situation?
Well, I know that project. I've been on those meetings. And, we were moving forward with Portland and Western Railroad, but then since the Union Pacific owns the underlying property, they got involved and put up roadblocks. I would start by talking to Chris Malm, and he's relatively new. That's why I'm here and he's not here, because he has about 2 months of experience. But give him a shot to try to do what he can do. But there's the civil hearing process that if you make an application and the other party disagrees to it, you can go to a civil hearing. But the civil law judge is going to say, is this required for the public safety? And if there's not a compelling argument to say that this project is for public safety, the civil law judge is probably going to side with the railroad, unfortunately, on most cases. That most people just, before it even gets to a civil law judge, because I've only seen it go to the judge twice. Typically, before it gets that far, parties withdraw or just figure things out on their own. But sometimes it might take that kind of a budge to get things going, but it may not go in your way either.
Okay, thank you.
Or it's
Mike.
frustrating. I know. I deal with it every day.
Mike, Jackie?
Yeah, I was just going to say that an example of a project that I was familiar with, although I was not directly involved, was in downtown Salem. And, I think the railroad companies are much more interested in closing than opening new crossings. In this case, it was more like we wanted to open a new crossing, but the deal was you can only open a new crossing if you close another crossing. So that if you have a crossing that you want to open, it's a new crossing, you might be thinking ahead about is there some place we might close a crossing to make it a.
And with the Union Pacific right now, that's not 1 for 1 anymore. Now it's 2 or 3 for 1.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I got from my engineer that he asked, is it really new at grade crossing and removal of 2 for 1? That's what his question was.
Well, that is UP's policy. It's not. It's a policy that they try to get 2 or 3 crossings closed for a new crossing. That's not necessarily. It's not a federal rule, a state rule. It's just their policies. That's what they want to do. Because just like us, they're mandated to eliminate crossings, not to build. We have by our Oregon administrative statute, it says that we are to eliminate crossings. So, we are always looking to try to consolidate, to build over or underpasses if we can. But we want to get rid of crossings because I too have seen personally the results of rail crossing accidents, and it is not a pleasant thing to, I helped the Salem police look for a gentleman's head for about a half hour. And that was not something that I want to do again. So we do not support building new crossings if we can possibly avoid it, But with that said, if it's required, if it's a necessity, then we will support building a new crossing. But we want to make sure that it is safe as possible. And safe as possible typically means money, because nothing's cheap.
Hey, Kathy Clark Kaiser.
Thank you. And this has been very helpful. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Mike Jaffe said. My question is, since the goal is for eliminating at-grade crossings, by there, I'm right there with you on having to deal with the aftermath of crashes. My husband was a first responder, fire chief, 42-year career, and those were that and highway crashes were some of the most horrific to deal with. So absolutely agree with getting rid of the at-grade crossings. However, two things are: is there funding set aside for over and under crossings? And two, does that make rail kind of like an impassable barrier as we're looking at developing land within our urban growth boundary? If it's a none shall pass, or you're only going to pass if you go over and under, which is very, very expensive. West Salem is a great example of that, trying to overcome that difficulty in planning, especially given our water table being so high. Going under is almost impossible. And will this also impact then the development of rail projects? We've talked about we want to add rail here and there. You have to look at it then from a land use planning. If you put down rail tracks somewhere, you are saying this is now a wall. You can't go from point A to point B unless you add some very expensive infrastructure. So that's like three questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's 100% true. I mean, it is a wall. You know, you can build entrances through walls from time to time, but it's not easy. Overpasses are very expensive. The funds that we have available, the federal Section 130 funds, those can be used for overpasses, but there's a match, and our funds, you know, we get I think it's $2-point-something million a year for the state of Oregon. You know, we are a very safe state. We are one of the lower as far as rail accidents and rail deaths. So because of that, you know, we don't get as much funds as, let's say, California, Texas, and Florida, where they have many, many, many accidents and deaths. Oregon has had 0 deaths this year. And you know, I think I was looking at either California or Florida. I think they're up to 64, something like that. You know, so we do a good job at keeping our crossings safe, and we have fewer than some states also. So that kind of gets us to where we don't get as much money. But there are always federal grants that can go along with that Section 130 funds. You just kind of have to be not shovel ready, but you have to have plans already. So and that in itself is expensive. So yeah, it is very expensive to do a. Go ahead.
So follow up though on that, because of Oregon land use law and also the requirement that we're looking at, you know, multimodal transportation in conjunction with the governor's direction for ODOT, DLCD, and other agencies to work together to reduce the use of passenger vehicle. If rail is now a impassable barrier by and large, or a very expensive barrier within our urban growth boundaries, is that factored in now to what we're doing with our comp plans in regards to land use around the rail infrastructure? Because some land now is essentially being taken out of potential use within our UGB, and we're already super constrained in our UGB anyway. These kind of requirements that you've got to go way over, and I mean the elevation on that, we were looking at 17 million, just, and that's old numbers, to go over the parkway, and we can't go under because of the water table. So when you've got infrastructure like that to join pieces of land within your UGB, we are put in a much more difficult space in terms of how we are going to plan for the use within our UGB. So have we talked about maybe some sort of collaborative planning between ODOT Rail and DLCD on what we within our UGBs can do with our land when we have a barrier of rail instead of an asset of rail? I'd like rail to be an asset. It's fabulous for freight. I'm all for it. But we can't create an even more this side of the tracks and that side of the tracks within our cities. We already have a lack of available land for affordable housing and other very, very important uses within the UGB. And good luck getting a UGB expansion. That's another conversation for another day.
What I would suggest is at your next meeting, either invite, and maybe both, Chris Mullen, who's my manager, who is looking at more of the bigger picture of things as far as planning and things like that. And then there's a gentleman named Bob Melbo, who is the source for all things railroad. He works for ODOT, and he's the Oregon State Rail Planner. And he used to be I think he was the president of the Portland and Western Railroad. He worked for one of the big Class 1 railroads. He knows everything railroad, and he can tell you about, what regulations that the railroads, what gives them the ability to say, no, we don't want to do that. He has a very deep well of information that might help you to understand the issue and maybe find some ways to get around it. So that's what I would suggest, that Bob Melbo, State Rail Planner. And
You have that, Kelly? I'm looking at Kelly because she's our person.
I do, and I'll follow up with Kurt after this to make sure I have the right name.
And I would like to, as a consortium, have a listing. If everybody had listings, and so we could send it to somebody just to kind of give them an idea of how we are so locked in some of our areas as to not being able to do anything based upon some of these railroads. Because like I said, it just stops things literally, no pun included, but dead on the tracks, because you can't build, you can't do things. And here we're trying so hard, to build multimodal and to try to, but then we can't go across railroad tracks. So what do? It literally cuts places in half. So Carl, did you want to add something? I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add, and this is just going to depress the heck out of all of you. The railroads, the big railroads, Class 1, have the authority through the federal government back from the 1800s, late 1800s. Some modifications were changed, right-of-ways and everything else. But the first argument you will always hear from a railroad is, we were here first, which is true. And because they were there first, they're allowed to determine what goes on their right-of-way. So somebody here mentioned that they're trying to build a bike path and they had to redo the entire railroad crossing just for a sidewalk. Yeah, that's their standard procedure. And they will tell you when they will do it, and they will tell you how much it will cost them to do it, and they will charge you for doing it. That is their right. And I don't know of a single railroad that works well or plays well, in the sandbox. CSX is one of the larger ones. Florida tried to do a commuter rail system in Central Florida. I was there working on it. CSX required the state of Florida to pay their vice presidents to negotiate the cost of buying the right-of-way. Florida did. Nationwide, there had been millions of dollars spent on rails to trails, buying back right-of-way that under federal law actually was the state's and not the railroads.
Yeah.
There is a law that was passed in the early 1900s that stated to the effect that the right-of-way stays with the railroad while it's in operation. If they abandon that railroad, supposedly they've abandoned the right-of-way, but they have deep pockets and not a single state has bothered to sue them over this. And then for that reason, states have spent millions of dollars on rails to trails project, when in fact the right-of-way was already ceded back to the state under federal law. So when dealing with railroads, it's almost never good news, and they are always difficult, and they have apparently, unless the federal government steps in, they have every right to do that.
Well, and that's just going to bring me back to somebody in the chat mentioned Peter DeFazio, who's the chair of the House Transportation Committee. He's from Oregon. I mean, do we need to reach out to him and say, hey, this is this is really affecting what we're trying to do with transportation. And could we get some comments or some support from you? I don't know, maybe that's a letter to put together, or I don't know if they're aware of it or not, but it's a big issue.
I would say they are.
Yes, Rick? Okay, go ahead, Kurt, and then I'll let Rick chime in.
I know they are aware because I've heard conversations that, they go fairly high up in state government. So, state government, the higher levels are aware of the situations that communities and road authorities face. And like Carl said, it has been since the 1800s that railroads have owned this property for the most part. So they've established that foothold, and it is their property. It is their private property.
Rick, did you want to add something before I go to Pat again?
Yeah, Kurt, I hear the frustration in your voice. I think we all share that. But also, if somebody is starting a process for an application, don't you think they would anticipate 2 years out as a minimum, and then find out that they may not be going anywhere? Would be a typical timeline?
So as far as our process, within our in-house at ODOT, we can do a rail crossing order start to finish within 60 days. But whenever you're talking about, especially a new railroad crossing, you're talking about right-of-way, you're talking about property, purchasing property from the railroad through their real estate department. Realistically, I just did a crossing order for TriMet just this last winter, and it's probably going to be 23, 24 before it goes to construction. So you're looking typically, yes, at least 2 or 3 years from when you say, I'd like to have a project, until it moves forward. So that's a realistic 2 or 3 years. Typically,
oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, typically nothing happens this year. You don't have a, hey, here it is January, and we'd like to get a project. So we turn in the application, we have our meeting. I've never seen it happen within that same year. It's always going to be at least a year to move forward, just because of the engineering plans, the reviews. Like Union Pacific, they have to have their engineers review the plans. They have to have their lawyers review the plans. It is a very lengthy process to try to get a crossing built and altered.
Hey, Valerie.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Question or comment here. So we've had pretty good experience working with short lines with regard to upgrading and improving crossings, particularly if you're willing to come to the table with, funding to help, reduce their cost. If you really want to get something done, you've got to expect to pay for it. I know that's already pretty much been talked about. But the one thing that I will also add is that if you ever have an opportunity to talk to a railroad because they want something or they need something, that is the time to negotiate everything you could possibly imagine you ever want. We had several years back, we had a corridor safety project that ran through Lynn County, and the railroad wanted to close some crossings, and we took advantage of that opportunity to get things done that we wanted done. And we didn't pay any money for it because ODOT and the feds had funding for the safety project, and we were able to get the railroad to agree to some things that they might not have otherwise agreed to because they needed to get this project through. So you can't let an opportunity like that go past.
Right. That's on a high-speed rail corridor, so that's a priority.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll just throw in here is a plug for Kurt. I've worked with Kurt off and on over the years on rail crossing stuff, and he's a great guy, wonderful inspector, and ODOT Rail in general has been good to work with over the years. So thank you for that, Kurt.
Thanks, Darren.
But I certainly don't, like I said, my angst, I don't want to necessarily point at you, and I appreciate you coming to kind of give us a direction. So I do appreciate that. Pat.
Yeah, and I appreciate Darren's comments. Savvy veteran, was till recently the public works person for Lynn County and now is county administrator, but he has roads in his blood, don't you, Darren? So I was going to kind of tag along with a suggestion that was made earlier to do a listing of our projects, and instead of kind of a piecemeal approach, and it seems like we might have more clout if that listing was from OMPOC and a group effort, and then going to Congressman DeFazio's office and maybe to Kurt at ODOT or a couple people at ODOT and to better define the scale of the problem. I mean, we've gone over that this is tough. Railroads are difficult to deal with, but at least share the information among our group and see how many projects we actually have pending that need some help. So that's my 2 cents worth.
And I thank you, Pat, because I think basically that is what I'm asking for. And I think that you're right. There is more energy if it comes from more people, and to put it forth. Mike Quilty.
So Central Point recently finished the Twin Creeks Railroad crossing. That was a project that took over 15 years to take and do. It takes a long time to get through the regulatory process. We had to find and identify and close another crossing. And we'll tell you that working with Corp and their current owners, it was way easier than when Fortress Investments owned Corp. Because at least now we were talking to railroad people instead of investment bankers. And if you think the railroads are hard to talk to, try getting things through the investment bankers that owned them. If you're going to do something with railroad crossings or you need to open a new one, you've got to be prepared to look at a decade plus of effort to get it done. It's their property and you're asking for permission to cross. It's really tough, but I would be hard-nosed too if someone wanted to cut across my backyard, and that's basically what it is. And yeah, there's public good from it, but at the end of the day, we're talking private property, like Carl said. So you've got to get them to, they've got to see what the benefit is before they'll do it. So you've got to make it enticing to them to want to work with you. It's a tough project.
Yeah, well, we're kind of running out of time, and so I'm going to keep it short. But I would agree that obviously it's an issue we need to try to get some sort of help with. And I think if we just had a listing of some of the big projects and things that are kind of at a halt, it might be nice to have another meeting and have a list of them sent to whoever's going to come to us so they could take a look at it and help us know the best way to proceed. So I would just like to see something come out as a result of this. And that was my purpose for bringing him on. So I appreciate, Kurt, you giving us a direction of who to bring in. I don't know if sending it to Kelly might be the way. I'll forward on something that I have from my transportation department and my engineers. If we all were to do that, that might help for future planning. Kelly, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Chair, I will send along the information that Kurt has shared with us today and then follow up with him on who to bring in for a follow-up conversation for our next OMPOC meeting. and then can work on getting that list of projects and the issues that they're creating started. I'll work with the MPO managers, and they can work with whoever else is needed to kind of consolidate that list.
Okay, and I thank you for that. And I thank you very much, Kurt, for coming on board. Very much appreciated. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a proposal to increase public transportation division engagement in the Metropolitan Planning Organization planning process. And that was the proposed draft that came forth, the blue piece, that's what I call it. I've color coordinated, that basically talked about the importance of having transit people involved in the MPO. And I would second, and I think that it is very important to do that. So is there a particular, I guess Marsha Hoskins is here to present for us.
I am, thank you. And thanks for giving us a bit of time on your agenda today. Kelly, I think there's a slide deck that you can bring up.
Kelly would be the person to bring it up, I think.
Sorry. Oh, you want me to, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
All right.
The draft, I'm assuming.
I will bring it up.
Yeah, I can do it too, but. Anyways, and so again, I'm Marsha Hoskins. I'm the Public Transportation Division Policy and Implementation Manager. And I'm actually here pinch hitting for one of my staff. Teresa Conley is one of our region transit coordinators. She's located over in Bend. And she's actually been taking the lead on this effort, partly because she has MPO background. She used to be the director at Albany MPO. So did she also send you the slide deck, Kelly?
No.
Anyways, Teresa has been working on this, and I'll do my best to present her.
Yeah, she sent me the, I don't think I got the slide deck, but here the draft proposals up on the screen now.
All right, I can, I'll send you the slide deck, and in the meantime, I can also talk through it. So, and then just
Are you able to see the document itself?
yeah, the document is up.
And I had attached it to the agenda email.
Okay, well, that makes more sense then, yeah. There's actually a deck that goes along with this. But basically, this process came about as a result of a finding that ODOT received from FTA and FHWA. It was a planning finding, and it was regarding not as robust of not a desire for a more robust engagement with public transportation and the MPO planning process. And so we've been looking at potential processes that we can formalize. I want to kind of preface this with many of the MPOs are already engaged with Public Transportation Division staff, the regional transit coordinators. And so I don't think that a whole lot of this is brand new rocket science, but I think by putting it down in a documented process, we're hoping that we will put a little bit more structure and rigor around our participation and hopefully resolve the finding with the Federal Highway and the, sorry, I can't do two things at once. I'm trying to send this to Kelly as well. There you go. Off and rolling. All right. Thank you. So anyways, as I mentioned, this is in response to a USDOT finding, and the finding was actually that ODOT should increase Public Transportation Division's engagement with the MPOs. So we've been seeking feedback from the MPOs, starting with the folks that we already know from our quarterly Public Transportation MPO meetings that we hold, which many of you are also participating on. And so we have sought feedback from, first of all, we started with the ODOT planning staff and the MPO liaisons, and then we took this around to multiple MPOs, and now we're taking the opportunities, since your meeting is also coinciding with this, to get some feedback from you too on what you think about the process that we're looking to strengthen a bit. In the actual advisory finding that ODOT received, the USDOT recommended that the Public Transportation Division play a stronger role in the metropolitan planning processes, and also that we coordinate with the Policy Data and Analysis Division, the Planning Division, and ODOT to identify those opportunities. So some of the actions that we've come up with, as I noted, have been developed in coordination with ODOT planning, with some conversations with MPO staff, and then largely relying on my regional transit coordinators who are located across the state that hopefully are at least connected in some degree, with some degree with your staff. So my goal for today is to get feedback, MPO feedback on whether we're on the right track and whether there's anything that's missing that we should prepare for as we look to implement our process and recommendations. But some of these recommendations are internal, so obviously it's on ODOT to implement them, but some of them will also involve working with your staff. So what we're trying to do is increase regional transit coordinator engagement in the MPO technical advisory committees, increase tools for transit coordinators to successfully engage with MPO, that's an internal process, increase both transit coordinator and transit agency engagement at the quarterly ODOT MPO transit meetings. I referenced that I normally attend, some of my transit coordinators attend, but we've had hit and miss from some of the transit agencies. So there's absolutely some work we can do to increase engagement at those quarterly meetings. We'd also like to increase transit coordinator engagement at the DOT certification reviews of MPOs. And then internally, again, my staff needs to collaborate better with Policy Data and Analysis, the ODOT Planning Division, when they're putting together information and narrative on each proposed STIP, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. So talking first of all, increasing RTC Transit Coordinator, it's an RTC Regional Transit Coordinator. Perfect, thank you, Kelly. Increasing RTC engagement at MPO TAC level. We're hoping that RTCs can at least be invited to all of these meetings so they can at least listen in and potentially flag some pieces that come up in conversation. Some RTCs already attend these meetings, others do not. We're hoping to continue to engage transit coordinators in the Unified Planning Work Program review and increase our engagement during the UPWP and also the Transportation Improvement Plan and Regional Transportation Plan development. Some MPOs have noted that they would consider establishing transit coordinators as ex officio, not voting, but ex officio members at MPO TACs. We've also heard, though, a concern about having too many ODOT staff involved in some of these meetings and some of these processes. So we're trying to be sensitive about that, and we're absolutely, as I said, open to and looking for feedback as we go forth with this. The next step is, next slide, Kelly, you heard me reference the quarterly ODOT MPO transit meetings. I would ask my transit coordinators to attend more regularly. I am already trying to encourage potential agenda topics from both my transit coordinators and the transit agencies. It may be from a staff perspective that we're going to have to rotate attendance. That's an internal detail, not important to you all, but we're going to also encourage transit agency attendance by including our transit providers on agenda development. This sort of creates an expectation for the transit coordinators who attend these meetings to stay tuned into MPO issues, concerns, and topics of interest. Because when we aren't included or participating in these meetings, we are sometimes unaware of topics of importance that come up within your agencies and your staff. I will just note that I was listening with interest to Kurt's presentation on the rail piece. Kurt's team used to actually be part of our division. They've moved over into the Commerce and Compliance division, but we still have ties with those folks. So even just knowing that there are some issues around rail crossings is a good piece for us to have in our head. I heard mention of multiple paths projects, and our public transportation division actually includes active transportation staff, so the Safe Routes to School, the Oregon Community Paths Program, and the Pedestrian Bicycle Program all also reside in our division. So again, just listening for connections, places where we can help. I think that's the value that we're hoping to get out of formalizing our process a bit much. So is that one the next slide? This is a internal piece. We would like to increase our own tools for transit coordinators to engage with MPOs. So internally, we're starting to share some best practices with transit coordinators who do have good connections, sharing their practices and things that communications, things they put in place with other transit coordinators. We have to get ourselves smarter, at least the regional transit coordinators, about the public transportation agency safety plans. The letters are reversed in this, sorry, it's PTASP. Public Transportation Agency Safety Plans and the Transit Asset Management Plan. Both of those plans include performance targets, which ODOT is required to coordinate with MPOs on those particular targets. I see a note from Eric in the chat too, which is helpful. Eric added a note that the rotating chair for the quarterly MPO transit meeting now includes the transit provider within the MPO as the co-chair. And I agree, Eric, that's actually part of what came out of these conversations. We're also trying to increase internal coordination between transit coordinators and the ODOT region MPO liaisons, and just even socializing this process has helped that quite a bit. We are thinking potentially we might ask MPO staff to come and share topical presentations to our division or to the planning division. So just some internal things that we're thinking about. The next slide that you can, sorry, Kelly, you can go to the next slide now. The next slide is that in some areas, transit coordinators have actually participated at the USDOT certification reviews, which happen, of course, as you all know, every 4 years, where USDOT certifies that each MPO serving a transportation management area is carrying out metropolitan planning process in adherence with their requirements. Certification reviews do also occur for smaller MPOs on request by the governor and by the MPO. We, Public Transportation Division, do not conduct full compliance reviews for transit agencies that reside in MPO areas. We have started to take a look at how they are handling some of our state funds, but generally federal funds for transit agencies within your areas come directly from the FTA, and that is where their oversight is. We've also received a suggestion that potentially transit coordinators could attend those FTA reviews of direct recipients within MPO areas. That has to be at the invitation of the transit agency. FTA will not include ODOT in direct recipient reviews unless the receiving agency is all right with that and approves that. So we're hoping that if transit coordinators can attend certification reviews, that might again increase our knowledge, identify places we can offer help and assistance, all of the above. The next slide is again an internal item, and this is an internal ODOT collaboration on the STIP narrative, and we've actually already increased that. Eric's staff reached out to us and we provided input to the last STIP narrative, and I think we're starting to put a pretty good collaboration process in place. FHWA and FTA also requested that the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan and the Transit Asset Management work be included in the last round of the STIP narrative, and we assume they're going to want us to continue that particular process. All right, last slide is just reiterating that what I'm looking for, and you all have the document, so you don't necessarily have to provide me feedback today, but you should have, and if you don't, Kelly and I can provide our contact information to take a look at the document and provide feedback to us. We're looking to increase our engagement with MPO technical advisory committees. We're looking to increase our own tools to successfully engage with MPOs. We're working with Eric and with MPO staff and transit agencies to increase RTC and transit engagement in the quarterly meetings. We'd love to be invited and included to listen in to certification reviews. And we're doing our own internal collaboration on STIP narrative. So as I noted, my intent in talking to you, and I very much appreciate you giving me the time, is to just put these efforts in front of you, make sure you are aware that ODOT is looking to improve these processes. And then as you see things that you want to point out to us, like we don't want 1 million ODOT staff at every one of our meetings, or whatever your particular piece of feedback might be, that's very helpful for us, because we don't want to do this in a vacuum. We want to absolutely make it a kind of a understood and agreed upon process that helps improve collaboration in the planning process. So I'll stop there. Eric, I don't know if you have any comments to add, since this has been kind of jointly evolving with your staff.
No, nothing to add. I think you walked through it. Again, I think it's just a really good opportunity to make sure within the MPO areas of responsibility, we have really good coordination. Transit is an important part of those conversations. So the more integrated into the planning process we can make it, I think the better. So these are some good ideas.
I'm going to open it up. I'm going to just agree with you. I think it's very important that we keep that open. It's my understanding, and Carl, you might be able to clarify me, but I do believe that our transit person is a part of our TAC. Me being being on the policy committee, I appreciate that engagement and would even like to further it down and have him come down to the policy meetings so that I can have more information to give to my constituents. Carl.
Yes, Scott Chansey is the, for all intents and purposes, general manager of Josephine Community Transit. He sits on the TAC. Paige West is the senior planner for RVTD. She's on our TAC. And Jennifer Boardman is the regional ODOT representative, and she is a member of both. So
I guess I'm saying we're fully in support of that. And any other questions that might come up or comments, I will take those. I don't see any hands.
So Valerie and Carl, I'm seeing you all as best practice for some of my other regions and some of my other transit coordinators, because it sounds like it's working very well down in Southern Oregon.
Any other comments? Okay, with that, I'm just going to say, if I hear nothing negative, I'm going to say go forward. I don't know specifically what you wanted from us, if you would just like an endorsement of the proposal. If I can get something from somebody to propose it. Pat Malone has his thumb up. I don't know if we need a motion or we just need to say that we are in support. I'll take a motion if there's one out there.
So moved.
Okay, and that was, so that we know who's talking.
That was Darren.
Okay, Darren can I get a second?
This is Pat. I'll second.
Second,
Good.
okay. So I'm gonna say all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Okay, with that, I think you have it. So go forward,
Excellent.
Marcia. I think, like I said, I think in our move towards green and public transit, it's important that we all keep engaged with what's going and moving forward. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you for
Yeah.
having me and for the endorsement. I appreciate it.
You bet.
I can't let this end without at least commenting that we're still a little sore about you stealing Teresa from us. So
She's an amazing resource. She really is.
all right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move forward. 9:45. We're a little bit off, but legislative update with Trevor Sleeman, ODOT Federal Affairs Advisor and Tribal Liaison. Trevor.
Good morning,
Welcome.
everybody. Thank you. I don't think I'll need 30 minutes, so I'll do my best to see if I can get you all back on schedule or closer to it. So you picked an interesting week to have a meeting. It's a big week for infrastructure in DC. So thanks for having me. And before we get into that, I just rewind really quick. I think last time I was with you all a couple months ago, we talked a little bit about how infrastructure, at least at that point in time, meant, at a minimum, three different things when it came to legislation in DC, right? We had the annual appropriations bill to fund the federal government. We had the FAST Act reauthorization bills, which were in process at that point in time. And then we had the President's American Jobs Plan proposal as the sort of big infrastructure stimulus concept. And at that point in time, those three things were all separate and totally different. And a couple of those came together in a pretty big way this week. So you probably all saw the announcement on whatever it was, Tuesday or Wednesday, that the bipartisan group of senators that have been negotiating on I think the original proposal was the President's American Jobs Plan, and then this bipartisan group took it up, and it was then called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, or BIF. So they made a big announcement on the BIF earlier this week that not only that they had a deal on that portion of it, the big spending sort of stimulus part of infrastructure, but also that deal incorporated the Senate's version of FAST Act reauthorization. So we're putting together at least three different bills here, because we've got the BIF piece, which is the $550 million in additional infrastructure spending. And then we've got the two Senate committee passed reauthorization bills. The Environment and Public Works Committee, if you recall, passed a highway title. The Commerce Committee passed a rail title, and we still haven't seen a transit title from the Banking Committee, but I'm told when this agreement comes out that all of those things will be packaged up into a single piece of legislation. So that's great news, very exciting. Whole lot of money we're talking about here, but it's still not totally clear how the $550 billion BIF and the underlying reauthorization bills all get stitched together and how that money all gets parceled out. You may have seen there was kind of a sketchy looking PDF of a 50-page document that was making the rounds earlier this week. And that thing, it turned out, was missing some pretty key details on funding programs for things like EV charging and reconnecting communities and resiliency grants. So a lot of holes in the few materials that have been provided publicly so far. And some of the stuff has been misleading. So we're really still kind of waiting on legislative text to be able to say for certain what this might actually mean for Oregon, what it might mean for ODOT, for MPOs and other folks who manage, own, or plan for transportation systems. So whatever that all looks like when it comes together, I think the very least we can say is that we expect a huge package of all of these bills. It's probably going to be a couple thousand pages altogether to pump a bunch of cash into infrastructure in a very broad sense. So what I mean by that is it's not just highways, transit, rail, the kind of the typical surface transportation items that we all typically work with. This is infrastructure in a broad sense. So there's funding in there for airports and for waterways and for broadband and water and wastewater and more. So it's not as if this framework is all pumping cash directly into things that we all deal with on a regular basis. It's going to be spread out pretty far and wide. So depending on how they push this stuff through the formulas and depending on who gets what piece of the pie, it could end up being a whole bunch of cash for agencies like those represented on the call here, or it could be, you know, more of a small to moderate increase. So really important that we get a hold of the details, which we just don't have yet. And it's kind of honestly a bit of a weird moment right now in DC for those of you who are accustomed to scrolling through transportation Twitter like I am. This morning has been especially strange and kind of hard to keep up with. So, you know, on the one hand, this week was undoubtedly a huge week and brought really clear, obvious, good news and forward progress in the legislative branch, which is sometimes kind of hard to come by, right? We not only did they announce this agreement on this huge bill, but they actually voted to move forward with debate by a pretty substantial margin, 67-32 in the Senate. That is a large bipartisan filibuster-proof majority, and that doesn't happen all that often. So the fact that this agreement, without any legislative text to speak of, the fact that it is moving through with those kinds of majorities is really significant, especially when you consider that last week a similar vote was held and it failed. So clearly they've made some progress this week and things are moving and changing. But on the other hand, as I pointed out a few times, it's kind of crazy that this thing is actually moving because there's not actually a bill. There's no text. No one has been able to see what's in this thing. Apparently, there are a few different versions of discussion drafts that are floating around in DC. Nothing official yet, and I haven't seen any of them. If any of you all have one of them, please send it to me because it's, you know, I think depending on how these details get sorted, as I said earlier, there are potentially hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. So Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader and, you know, in charge of floor proceedings in the Senate, said that he's expecting to have another bipartisan vote today. That would be another procedural motion on debating this measure. And he said that he believes the Senate may work through the weekend on this deal, and he thinks that it can be finished within a matter of days. So that is also good news, but it also seems like, you know, there are different issues that are cropping up with the pay-fors in the bill and the broadband sections of the bill, and it's almost like they're playing a little bit of whack-a-mole as these things kind of come up and then they're dealt with and something else comes up. So, so I would, yeah, it could be an interesting weekend in the Senate. The other part of this, of course, is the House of Representatives. This deal so far has been negotiated only with senators and the White House, and the House of Representatives has been completely left out of the deal. As you might guess, Chairman DeFazio is furious about this. I think not only does he not like the fact that the underlying reauthorization bills in this agreement are the Senate's version and not his, I think he feels like, and you know, rightfully so, this bipartisan group of senators, with the exception of maybe Susan Collins, is not necessarily the Senate transportation brain trust. These are moderate senators who wanted to make a deal on the numbers of this subject, and they didn't really have a real transportation policy details person in that group, like Chairman DeFazio, who knows this stuff like the back of his hand. So I think he's expecting that there could be some other shortcomings in this deal that folks hadn't anticipated. So he has had some very choice words for the agreement that I won't repeat here. He, I think, would like to have a conference committee so that the House and Senate leadership could, you know, appoint conferees and work out the differences between the House and Senate on the underlying reauthorization piece. But it sounds like this bipartisan group of senators that negotiated the deal with the White House and the White House, sounds like neither one of them are in favor of a conference committee at this point in time. It sounds like they really want to push this thing through as quickly as they can. So I think an interesting, you know, if we see some action in the Senate this weekend, and if they do, as Chuck Schumer says, pass this thing out of the Senate within a matter of days, it'll be interesting to see if there are enough moderates in the House, Republicans and Democrats, who see the sort of moderates in the Senate coming together for this deal. Be interesting to see if there's a block of those types of folks in the House that can get this thing to passage. So, you know, we could get into the details about all the numbers and different things in this framework, but I think really until we know how the formulas and programs are going to work, it's not a particularly useful exercise. So I'll mostly leave it there and just say, keep an eye on the news over the weekend. If the Senate, as I said, if they really can pass this thing with a significant majority, not unlike the procedural vote yesterday that was 67 to 32, I think that'll put some pretty significant pressure on House leadership to just take up the bill and pass it as well and get the win and move on. So lots of interesting dynamics for transportation policy wonks, for congressional procedural nerds and the like. And I think, we just kind of have to go along for the ride at this point and hope that what comes out the other side is good for us and everybody on the call and the assets we manage and the public we serve. So stay tuned for more.
Okay, Pat has a question.
Yeah, Trevor, is this haste on the Senate? When's their recess coming, and is that part of this? I heard a suggestion is, well, we've got a lot of important stuff going on. Why don't we shorten our month-long August recess? Your comments on what the Senate is up to?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a little bit more interesting with the House because the House is scheduled to go on their August recess today. So what does the House do if the Senate is scheduled to work through next Friday? At least the last calendar I saw. So they've got some time to work this thing through. But what does the House do if the Senate kind of pulls the rabbit out of the hat here over the weekend and passes this thing? That puts the House in a little bit of an awkward position. I don't know that they would come back necessarily because it's not their idea and they, I don't know. But I would also say that legislative leaders threatening to cancel or shorten the August recess, that is a ploy that's probably as old as the August recess itself and generally never comes to pass. So I'm not sure what happens, but it doesn't feel to me like this is the sort of thing that the House gets called back for in the middle of August. And the Senate's got another week to get it done.
And is it accurate that nobody, including you or Chuck Schumer, actually has a final version of what they're talking about? That there are several versions floating around and there's some blank spots in some of the details. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's I haven't seen one, and I haven't seen one that's been released broadly to the public. I've just heard in a couple of places that there are discussion drafts that are hard copies only, working their way around the hill that are anywhere from 25 to 2,700 pages in length. So it's not clear to me what's in there, what's settled, what's unsettled. And the whack-a-mole comment was a comment that I heard earlier today from John Thune, who's a senator in Republican leadership from South Dakota, who's been involved in the talks. So he's the one who kind of said, this may not be fully baked just yet. So I think your summary is accurate there, Commissioner.
Thanks.
Okay, and I would agree. That's probably pretty accurate. Washington at work. So we're not. Okay, if there's no other comments, I thank you, Trevor. And like I said, we'll stay tuned for the next act, shall we say? Hoping
Sounds
movements.
great.
We were all hoping that the recess part would push it a little faster, but I'm not feeling that's going to happen. So anyway, at least we're making progress. I think that's a good thing. So at this point in time, thank you for bringing up. We are at about 10:22. So you brought us up pretty close. I would like to take a break and stand up for a few minutes, as I'm sure everybody would like that opportunity. So should we give ourselves 8 minutes and get up and meet back here at 10:30? Does that sound okay to everyone? All right. So that's it. 10:30. We'll meet back here to continue our meeting.
Oh, goody.
Hi, Kelly. I just thought I'd mention, I think you gave me host rights. Is that right? So
I
I'll
did.
be
And
ready to present.
great, I did, and I was just messaging you that I'll have it up ready as well if you need to, but if you want to test
Thanks.
it here. maybe we
Yeah,
can
I'll
make
test
sure.
it.
Okay.
Let me do my share screen function and find it. There it is. How's that? You see that?
It works. I love it when things work.
Okay. Okay, great.
And I think,
Um,
yeah, you're next on the agenda, so you're welcome to maybe stop sharing, and but you'll have hosting rights until.
Yeah, I don't want anyone flying in going, what happened?
Saying how exciting
So,
this next agenda item going to be. They'll be excited to see that.
Wow. Just appreciate the chance. That's
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks. Of course, not everybody from the tribes has moved to town. And well, the area where I'm going to ride today and in the next ride, that is really like tribal territory in Namibia. So I'll still pass plenty of Himba villages and Demba villages. This is already where the dirt road begins. Still in Apuo. Wow, look at that. That's a termite mound, I think. Let me have a quick look. Remember, where was that? Somewhere in South Africa, where I was pointing at those termite mounds and they were, I don't know, this high? Well, maybe I say, you think that's a big termite mound? Look, they just built it against this tree here. Wow. That's just mind-blowing. How did they do it? Incredible. Yeah, I've reached the top where I can fill up again on fuel. Let's do that. there's palm trees. I'm gonna see, gonna see a lot of more of these. It's amazing to see palms again. Petrol to the left here. First, petrol diesel this way. Here we go. Petrol. Hi. We have some.
Okay, I've got 10:30. So how are we doing?
Go.
Couple more minutes, I guess, for people to pop on. So are we ready to move forward? Oregon Transportation Plan and Oregon Highway Plan updates from Adam Argo. Is Adam with us?
I am here and ready. Thanks, Valerie.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and start and let people pop back on as they do, but I'm ready for you. And it is 10:30, so.
I appreciate that. So I've been given sharing screen and hosting rights. So I'm going to go ahead and call up the slides. And hopefully you're all seeing this.
Yes, I am. So I'm assuming if
Great.
I am, everybody else is.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity. My name is Adam Argo. I am a principal planner in the statewide transportation planning unit at ODOT. That unit is within the planning and policy section that Eric Hovig manages. So as I'm presenting on the Oregon Transportation Plan update, Eric's probably going to have some pretty good insight and things to help for context and whatever. He can do it in the chat or he can come on in and talk. But he's closely involved. So it's really great to have him helping me along here. And with that, I want to talk about what I want to present on. We'll do an overview of the update, and some of that is going to be about process. Some of that will be about background work that has been done up to now. I've actually addressed OMPOC before. This was back in, I believe, January or February of 2019, which might as well have been 100 years ago, given COVID and everything, or even 1,000 years ago, you know, back when railroads started being grandfathered in on right of way. So what I just wanted to connect to back when I last talked with OMPOC was we were doing the very kind of stage zero preparations for this update. We were relating on a project I manage on emerging technology impact assessment for the agency, looking at a range of transportation technologies and their implications on ODOT policy going forward. That was kind of a starter for this. So I may backtrack to some of the things that was talked about then. Also want to talk about trends and topics. Does relate back to when I last talked to OMPOC, but it's also really meant to be This is illustrative of the kinds of things we're going to take up in the OTP update process. It's snapshot. It's not going to be the whole universe, but it's an example that I hope helps you understand what our approach is. And then hopefully leaving enough time for discussion and questions at the end. I definitely want to give any members here a chance to get some questions they may have had, because you may have started getting news releases about our selection process for the key steering committee that I'm going to talk about as we go. Oh, and I'm sorry about this. I'm going to arrange my slides correctly. There we go. So what is the Oregon Transportation Plan? This diagram is really meant to show that the Oregon Transportation Plan is an overarching policy plan that guides Oregon's management of the transportation system over a 20 to 25 year time frame. So there are Oregon administrative rules that basically direct the Oregon Transportation Commission to oversee and adopt and update the OTP. Underneath the OTP are the mode and topic plans. Many of you are probably familiar with our statewide planning process, but I like to note that some of the topic plans, such as the Oregon Freight Plan and the Oregon Highway Plan, have to conform to certain federal regulations on when they're updated in the elements. But we also have other mode plans where, such as the bike ped plan, that are to help us implement aspects of our overarching OTP, and also that are in step with the transportation planning rule. And then, as you see, it really gets down to the local level with transportation system plans. And implementation is really, to me, the connecting thread of what the OTP is down to the transportation system plans, and of course in step with RTPs as well, as you're all OMPOC members understand that. Why are we updating it now? A lot of this is to recognize that there are so many things evolving in the transportation system. We recognize we want more focus on users, because there are so many different users who have so many different needs on the state's system. We also want to understand very key trends, what we call drivers of change, that are really moving in such a rapid pace that we need to know our policies have some aspect of resiliency. So that's where within these drivers of change, I've framed it as technology or demographic changes, workforce, freight, climate change. These are very key examples of the types of drivers of change in our approach to the OTP update. And of course, the constraints, the fact that we are very constrained right now with resources. There are competing priorities. To really spin it up at the bottom line is, it's about trade-offs. So the OTP is this opportunity right now for the update is to address those and try to establish frameworks for how we're going to navigate and understand these trade-offs, looking ahead at a 20 to 25 year horizon. The contents of the OTP, if any of you are familiar with the current OTP, it's what you probably have seen or are familiar with in your own respective work on updating regional, local plans. There is a existing conditions and trends, kind of the context setting part. There's the vision. We want to define where we're going. But within that, of course, are the what? The goals and the policies and the strategies of how they get there. Also, what then imparts to the how, where some of the strategies are really going to be better fit in the mode and topic plans, because they're more of a kind of strategic tactical level instrument of all of the things that are ensconced in the OTP. But the OTP is the starting place, and it it will have its own implementation component to guide how we prioritize, particularly, I would say, in the prioritization of investments. So there is a decision-making structure that we are standing up right now. We issued notice to proceed on the contract with the consultant who's leading this work. I am the project manager for the agency. And in doing so, that was in April, early April, we know we need certain advisory groups in certain roles and realms that are going to spin up and direct the guidance of goals, policies, strategies to the ultimate authority on the OTP update, and that is the Oregon Transportation Commission. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these groups. This diagram is to illustrate what the relationship is between these groups. So starting with the chief advisory body making recommendations to the OTC throughout this, what will be an 18 to 24 month process is what we're expecting. And that's the Policy Coordinating Committee. This is an external group. We are targeting to have 25 members on the Policy Coordinating Committee. They are going to meet about 6 times. We don't exactly have the first meeting date nailed down, but we do expect the range. We're targeting a range that's going to be late September, most likely, continuing through probably the end of 2022. They're really needing to represent a variety of interest areas. That does include statewide viewpoints. So that would mean there's local government needs to be represented. There's regional context. There's a need to represent the different diverse communities throughout the state. There's a need to represent expertise. It's across modes and topics that are chief to the plan. And really, what we're really trying to do now with this update process is bring user perspectives, socially diverse makeup, and get people who traditionally have not been involved in our processes at the statewide planning level to help us understand their needs, to have representation that truly also represents the changing demographics makeup of our communities across the state. We are going forward where the Policy Coordinating Committee will be chaired by Commission OTC Chair Van Brocklin. And let me get into the other decision-making structure teams. There may be questions about the PCC you all have, and we'll try to get to those with the time that remains on our spot. The planning coordination team is internal to ODOT, and it's really meant to be our kind of validation confirming entity, because we're taking up large topics where there are many programs, many projects in motion, many kind of understanding of the funding outlays. And what this group is to do is to basically confirm the kinds of information that's going to be presented to the Policy Coordinating Committee. There's a certain cadence and rhythm, and I'll be able to show that in illustrating with the schedule, that they meet in front of, or they need to be briefed following the Policy Coordinating Committee meetings. They really help us move the agency forward in the update process. Work groups are really the places where we can do deep dives on some of these key topical areas. There are about 7 of those that we're going to have. Here you see the bullets of the theme topic areas that they're organized around. They're a blend of our consultant team, subject matter experts, agency subject matter experts, but also we hope to see that there are community members who may have particular perspectives, interests, and could lend to these work groups as well. They really do a lot of research and findings and kind of the type of key messaging starts with the work groups and the planning coordination team. There's an interplay there that would get to findings and recommendations to the policy coordinating committee. So I just want to note that we're in a new era, of course, that does the good news about what we all had to do in a kind of reformation around remote work and telework during COVID is building up the ability to use the tools online to reach across the different communities in the state. And that's exactly what we'll be doing during this project. This is an illustration of what MnDOT, Minnesota DOT, did with their version of the OTP, their statewide transportation plan update. And we anticipate that we have scoped actually in the contract 2 online open house engagement efforts. And that's an interactive monitor participatory element that we really hope is going to get voices and reach across where we just haven't had people before because they aren't able to come, say, from Burns or Joseph to Salem. So this is a big part of what our consultant team has in their wheelhouse to help us stand up. I expect that the 2 online open houses are first to kind of be bookended with the PCC deliberations. So we expect in October, we probably launch this online open house for about a month. And that's really to get people grounded in what the OTP update is about and to start hearing about how users are experiencing the system and just get some real input about what are needs, what are challenges. And then the second online open house is likely to be towards the draft of the OTP, where we have some major findings out of our exploration of trends and drivers of change, as well as where the PCC has gone in developing a vision, policies, and strategies. And I'm going to talk a bit about scenario planning, which that second online open house is really going to relate certain scenarios that we're exploring. So that gives me an ability to kind of lead into that in talking about our approach to assessing trends and topics. This stuff may seem familiar to any of you who tuned in to the Oregon Transportation Commission's last meeting, July 15th. That was presented upon by myself, my supervisor, Transportation Planning Unit Manager, Michael Rock, and our newly minted Policy Data Analysis Administrator, Amanda Peets, who I understand is the standing member of OMPOC, but Eric, of course, is the first alternate in their stead here today. So our approach was to relate that we are needing to align this OTP update with things that are in motion that include the Oregon Transportation Commission's strategic action plan that they approved and was adopted for the agency late last year, and that we are currently in process of implementing. And that, if you're all familiar with that, is a 3-year type of plan around 3 priority goal areas. And there's a lot of interrelationship between the OTP and the strategic action plan's goals around equity, around sustainable funding, and around development and management of a modern transportation system. So also, I want to relate how we're taking up key topics and trends to inform the update. So a major tool that we are utilizing throughout this process is something many of you may have already have done as a process, and that is scenario planning. It's in this context, it's really exploratory scenario planning. It's asking what if questions to address an uncertain future. It's considering driving forces of change in all of the different directions they can go. And this is an example of what kinds of drivers of change we're talking about: demographic employment patterns, technological advancements, disruptive events, and that includes climate related weather events, and Cascadia subduction event. There's a relationship there in terms of what in the plan enables us to be resilient. And then transportation funding levels. That's absolutely key here. What we'll be doing in our scenarios work is recognizing the state's oversight and the management of funds, but also we want to relate more exogenous elements that's around federal funding and local funding issues too. This graph is just to illustrate that a key aspect of scenario planning is that we're successfully doing the two-way between the technical process and the public involvement process. You know, we use our wizards at ODOT in the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit and other staff, for instance, to get our modeling tools calibrated, get our methodology in place enough to be able to try to explore these uncertainties and think about develop pictures of what could be in a 25-year frame, even out to 2050. But it's all about how successfully we engage the stakeholders, we want to know we're in step with what they want to know. And we want to engage and help relate findings out of these scenarios. And that the feedback we get from that is what spun up to the OTC. This is really a graphic to illustrate that our Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, that's our modelers, and a lot of you OMPOC members are probably familiar with how much our TPAL staff work with your MPO modeling staff leads. And this is to illustrate there's an approach to which modeling and assessment tools do you use based on what scale are you exploring at. For the OTP, we're mostly at a strategic level. So this STORM, which is strategic model, tactical model, operational model, then with the acronym ends with reporting and monitoring that binds all of these different scales and different tools we use. That we're mostly staying at that strategic level using tools such as Vision Eval, which some of you should be familiar with. That is definitely our key strategic model to understand where we're going on meeting our mandated GHG reduction targets. And so with that, I want to talk about how the scenario planning also is an outgrowth of some of the work that we had done in preparation for this OTP update. That includes our stakeholder interviews that we conducted last year, and then the Emerging Technology Impact Assessment, which was the project that I was in the middle of when I last briefed OMPOC members. So with the stakeholder interviews, we got about half and half mix of internal staff at basically an executive manager or division administrator level, as in a mix of external stakeholders, which may have included some of you. And it was really to help inform what do we need to understand about the OTP now and what you want to see with the update. We got about 43 interviews completed. And this relates that these are the key themes we heard, and that pinwheel graph is really what within those themes really rose to the top. So I just want to do a quick rundown by the theme of what we heard the most from stakeholders that really got the kind of common concerns. There were the concerns that had the highest temperature take, if you will. Insufficient funding is all about having sustainable resources of funding. A major concern on safety is multimodal safety. With goods delivery, it's about how we're delivering freight, and that's both in the long haul trucking, but down to local delivery, because there's a lot of rapid changes and challenges going on in those arenas. On aging population, we heard big concerns about the needs of rural Oregonians and transportation options. And with congestion, it's really issues about pricing And what are the impacts in the Portland metro area in relation to that have very tangible effects and concerns across regions and communities within the state and the state system overall. Environment and climate change is all about the need to address GHG emissions, and where we even came out and basically said we're off track on meeting our state mandated goals. And equity. Applying an overarching equity lens to OTP is absolutely paramount and key. And we heard that from stakeholders, and we continue to understand that in terms of our engagement on efforts going on right now, both within the agency and with our external stakeholders and the public at large. This is just to relate that the emerging technology impact assessment had some key outcomes. You know, we really wanted to draw upon foundational goals that are in place now for the agency and examine how changing transportation technologies can impact important outcomes from goals we have in place and more recent challenges and issues around the transportation system. I want to point to a couple key engagements we did that's illustrated on the far right of the graph. One was a half day with the Oregon Transportation Commission in the fall of 2018. I probably related that in the 2019 OMPOC meeting. That was really to get the commissioners grounded in our approach to thinking about how these major drivers of change around transportation technologies are impacting our decisions and system now, but what kind of implications they have to our policies going forward. And we had a state agency peer exchange. I think we had about 20 representatives of state agencies in that session. And that was to relate top issues of concern they had and how it's impacting their strategic work connected to transportation. There was a lot of cross-cutting elements you might expect that are top of mind to them too, include equity, transportation safety, climate change, workforce implications, urban-rural disparities, and housing affordability. Here's just a quick example of where we would take a key trend or driver of change, such as vehicle technologies. And what we wanted to do is examine how the trends might influence ODOT outcomes. Just want to take the top two bullets. In considering vehicle fleet electrification and expansion of EV charging infrastructure, how can we meet the growing demand of that with outcomes that we have to consider around CO2 emissions and air quality, the revenue impacts of fewer vehicles that pay into the gas tax, and that means a transition, right? In that transition, we really look to the road user charge as a means of buttressing and eventually fully going forward, hopefully in the future, utilizing that as our instrument of generating funding on the system. The lower household costs we could see attributed to the fact of more penetration of EVs in the market, more shared use that can include micro mobility options, mobility as a service, where if that lowers the transportation cost per household, that could also mean significant increases in VMT per capita. What does that mean for management of the system? And what kind of investment requirements will that mean for ODOT? So other white papers and research are also underpinning and driving our work. They include a white paper we did on economic and economic regions, a kind of a snapshot of that, and along with demographic trends. And then a look at the Oregon Highway Plan mobility policy that's in place now in OHP, if you're all familiar with 1G1. Maybe the most well-known policy we have in place in our statewide facility planning about utilizing the right-of-way you have within your facilities to accommodate our needs and what we project out. So we really had to look at that and examine what might we need to understand and to evolve our mobility policy, and also relate with our partners such as Portland Metro, who are doing their own work on re-examining and actually really reassessing their mobility policy. I want to note we do have a statewide equity white paper that is nearly complete. And it is both a look at how ODOT defines equity in certain contexts, and then also what are other state agencies and other transportation agencies doing at the MPO county level in standing up equity and fronting it in their, and how they prioritize investments. That's going to be coming very soon. We expect the final report to be completed this month. It will be publicly available. So if there's interest in that, I'm happy, you know, Kelly, however we can get that sent to you all to access. So this is just to quickly illustrate that our approach in our white paper is really building an approach we want to take on understanding the different regions and their issues around the economy and around demographic trends. And this is our proposed study regions we used in the white paper that I think we want to utilize in the OTP update. They're coincident with what are called public use microdata areas, if any of you are familiar with utilizing those aggregations from the census. But they also, to me, while they're not coincident with our area commissions on transportation boundaries, they're broader than that, but they really should help us understand regional and local transportation issues. There's overlap. And so we want to incorporate information we obtained from the ACTs and the MPOs for the broader analysis on regional economic and demographic trends. This is some illustration of key takeaways we got from the white paper that we want to inform stakeholders about. Oregon's population has grown by 24% since 2000, with an additional 8% growth expected by 2030. And that the driver of population growth is going to be net migration. Our racial mix and ethnic mix of residents across all regions is changing. We are becoming more diverse, though, you know, the nature of that change, it's dependent on the communities. But between 2000 and 2018, we examined what those changes look like. That the population of Oregon's aging, and out-migration in rural communities has slowed growth in labor force, and there's increasing reliance on efficient transportation network to access lifeline services in a lot of ex-urban and rural communities. And as congestion rises with urbanization and the increasing remoteness of affordable housing, is actually causing a deleterious impacts on the reliability of our system on the network. And the key economic finding that as our economy in the state's becoming more diversified and we're growing in services and tech, you find in the Portland metro region in central Oregon that we're increasingly resilient to economic shocks, but that the COVID-19 revealed some pretty big disparities in regional economies, and that our economy is volatile. It overperforms in periods of growth, but it suffers more in periods of contraction. That's an example of some of the takeaways we got. I want to end first with just going over the fact that we have a project charge to the Policy Coordinating Committee. That's kind of going to be our North Star guidance of objectives and principles that we need the PCC to be mindful of throughout their process of meeting and advising the Oregon Transportation Commission. Our objective is a vision for the Oregon's future transportation system. So it's getting back to what I kind of started with. We need to understand there are different users of the system that have distinct needs. We need a plan to guide investments for the next 20, 25 years. We need an investment strategy on a shorter term range than the extent of the long range plan that the OTP is. We need meaningful engagement of the public. and a plan that's resilient in the face of uncertainty. We need to clearly delineate trade-offs. The work, the consultant team's work and the work of those work groups that I talked about, and the planning coordination team, that internal ODOT work, they're really going to be key to helping relate that to our policy coordinating committee. This last slide is just to give you a perspective of our schedule. Like I had mentioned before, I think it's looking like the first meeting of the PCC is late September. And this is sort of to give you an understanding of the interplay between the key tasks behind the project. So with that, there may be plenty of questions, but I want to end so that there is some time for that. And thanks a lot. I really appreciate everyone giving me the time to talk about this. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, if that's okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah. Okay, Steve?
There's all kinds of promises of infrastructure money coming from the feds. They keep saying it's passed, it's not passed, I don't know. But we will have some money coming to Oregon. And how will that overlay on the second chart you had up there on the different areas of projects you want? I guess you don't even know where to put it till we know what we're going to get. And then when we get money there, how fast would we be able to implement that money into the programs?
So Eric, you would be welcome to weigh in on this. I will just say within process, Steve, what we have to do is incorporate as best we can a look at where we might see infusions of funding or certain real serious changes to programmatic outlays in that are assumptions in our scenario models, so that we can understand over time where might be some key point of inflection, but also where is it that it's going to be ODOT's management realm and control, and where is it that it's going to be the federal control, and where is it's going to be, down to the local level. So we really have to do whatever we can to help calibrate our models, if you will, through what our assumptions are. But there's more than that, I know. There's how we're going to get an understanding with our planning coordination team, for instance, that's going to give us this is the reality you're looking at with who's going to get what. Eric, you might have a take on that too.
Yeah, Steve, really, really good question. So there's two parts, and Adam's talking about the long range. How do we think about long-term funding in the policy plan? And we're going to be thinking about a lot of different scenarios. We need to also look at some scenarios that are going to be not continuing those kind of infusions, and how do we prioritize and make really tough trade-offs, and bring up even the concept of disinvestment, which is a really hard concept, but we're going to have to think about that. So Adam really described that well, that we're going to factor a lot of those things into the long range kind of look around what does the funding picture look like and what kind of priorities do we have. I think you're really asking more about the short term. If this money really does come from the federal government, and let's say Trevor is really optimistic and we get a bill passed, sometime this fall or sometime soon this year. Yes, once we know what those monies are, then we're going to have to work with the Oregon Transportation Commission. We're right now in the middle of the 24-27 STIP. We may have to also modify the 21-24 STIP. It's going to depend on when those monies are available, which fiscal year, what kind of expectations on when they have to be expended. So a lot of details to work through that we'll be starting, I'm sure, beginning to have those conversations. Once we have a little more clarity of what might be in those potential measures and bills, because right now all we have is, as Trevor said, kind of concept. We don't even have bill language yet to dissect. So we don't know what those expectations are. But we will be looking, I'm sure, at modifications to the 21-24 potentially, and definitely it should impact some ways the 24-27. I just don't know exactly what that looks like yet.
Okay, let's see. That's a problem I hope we have. But one thing I want us to remember is I've seen federal monies come to Oregon before. I'm old, okay? And when those monies run out, it's pretty serious situation. So we have to keep that in mind if it happens.
Well, and that's why we want to be really careful in the long range that we don't assume and that everything's rosy and we keep getting those kind of infusions all the time.
Right.
Because there's periods of time we don't get those, and that really can change what we invest in and our priorities. And again, making some tough choices about where we choose not to invest for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And again, nobody likes to hear that because everybody wants to get the money for their community or their part of the state. But yeah, we're going to have some really robust conversations. And that's the process Adam's outlined, is how do we have those discussions? So great question. I'm with you, Steve. It's a problem we want to have in the short term.
Yep.
But we also don't want to be assuming that short term is going to be our long-term picture all the time.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Comments? I don't see any hands raised. I do have kind of a question, and this is, I guess, my confusion a little bit with the state, because we've got the RV Acts trying to figure out what the role of the RV Acts play. I mean, that they play, what roles the MPOs play. I mean, I know that's just kind of, and how that all ties into the OTC, but that is the piece that kind of confuses me, quite frankly, because I'm on the RV Act as well as MPO, and the RV Act kind of seems lost a little bit, and they're trying to figure out what their role is. But is that going to be worked through this planning as well?
Valerie,
I'll let
good
you start
question.
over there.
Yeah, I got that one, Adam. Thank you, Valerie. So hopefully everybody that's affiliated with area commissions like yourself is aware that the Oregon Transportation Commission has asked ODOT to lead an ACT refocus conversation, and there's a work plan, and we've shared that with the commission, and there's more and more information coming out from that process, I think, on a regular basis. So we actually, my team has been charged with implementation of that work plan and working with the others across the state on those kind of activities. So you're going to see a lot more coming down through the pipeline over the next number of months and over the next year. I think as we think about what's the primary role of the area commission, how does ODOT engage with the commission, how does the OTC engage with those area commissions, et cetera. But it is really an ACT refocus. And I think, we do have a lot of tools in place around MPO coordination and consultation. So this is one of those kind of coordination opportunities. The MPO transit ODOT meeting is another coordination opportunity. We also have a lot of other regular activities through policy committees, technical advisory committees, et cetera. And then we have concerted efforts like Adam just talked about with the Oregon Transportation Plan and our policy plans, where we will be consulting with MPOs, making sure we're bringing MPO staff and policy boards into the mix of these conversations. There's opportunities to see how these policies are coming together, provide meaningful input and direction and advice to the PCC. Again, the PCC is going to be like the steering team for the plan. But at the same time, we can't put everybody that wants to be on that. It would be a team of 100 some people if everybody wanted to be there. That's undoable. So how do we get the most perspective and diverse opinions we can to inform that? And then we need to use our public involvement, public engagement, and consultation processes to help fill in the gaps and really provide meaningful and comprehensive engagement throughout the development of these things. And I'm hoping those similar tools will work in other areas we need to work with our MPO partners, not just long-range policy planning.
Okay, that helps. I was excited to hear about the online participation, hopefully with us going through this whole COVID and learning to be technologically more communicative. I know that I've in the past often gone to the OTC meetings, and I mean, it's really, I have heard one really loud contingent talking, most notably Metro conversations, and I have felt frustrated because I know that, those of us who are rural don't have, our voices are not heard as strongly. And so I am hoping that we can spread and find ways to bring more of those voices from rural and other areas to the table as well. So I think that's going to be key, is how to implement and getting people to understand that they can have a voice in what's going on in the future.
Valerie, we staff, and I would say even our commission really agrees with you. And we had that discussion with our commission around the membership at a very high level. And I think there's a strong recognition we need many different voices, and the rural voice needs to be at the table and have as much weight as the urban voices. And so that's something I know we are thinking strongly as we think about membership of the committee, but also in our engagement opportunities. You know, back to your comment of being virtual and electronic and online kind of stuff, we are really wanting to have, outside of just engagement through these kind of tools like virtual meetings, but just a much more active online presence. I don't want to see our website be content that hasn't been updated for 2 months. We want it active. There's stuff happening all the time, and we can use that more effectively for engagement than we have in the past. So I've challenged Adam and our team to think differently and to try some things. We're probably going to stumble and fail on a few of them, but we're going to definitely try to move in the right direction.
And I will just add that it's one of the things that I'm seeing, and because we talked about the aging population, that it's out there and they're not as savvy as, say, the younger generation. So I think it's important that we try to have forums where it can be both. And, you know, those people who want the opportunity to come in and be in a forum and yet get their ideas put forth is important as well. So I don't know, looking forward to it. I am bringing more people on board. Any other comments?
Looks like Walt might have a comment. I'm not sure if that's his hand up. It's not yellow on my screen.
Okay.
Yes,
go ahead.
I do have a comment, more of a question. Going back to your storm scenario that you have, I understand strategic and tactical. I forgot what the O was for.
Operational.
Operational. But it seems like you're missing one thing that we see day in and day out. And that's reactive. Every day. The first thing I do every morning when I get up, even though I have nowhere to go, I turn the news on. I like to know what's going on around. And every day, or more often nowadays, the 5 freeway or the 205 are shut down for 2-3 hours. That's not something you can plan for. It's reactionary. It's retaliatory in a nature. But I'm looking at a scenario to where, let's say we did have one, in fact. I-22 got shut down. How many people did that really affect? How was anybody supposed to plan for that?
So, Walt, when we say operational planning, it includes some of those kind of things you're talking about. So, you know, one of the things we're hoping in the long-range policy work is thinking about, you know, critical routes from a resiliency standpoint, lifeline. You know, what happens if some of those routes go down? Do we need to be planning for things to help minimize that impact? You know, Cascadia has been kind of one of those areas of focus for the last number of years. You know, if we had the big 9.0 earthquake, and how do we get people to and around the state and emergency supplies? So I do anticipate those kind of things to come up in the long range policy work. The other part you're talking about is really more tracking and monitoring how the system is performing and when things happen. So our tools do let us look at some of those kind of real world scenarios. So with the the forest fire and with some of the other things we've had where I-84 was closed down, we could actually look and see how that affected travel and travel patterns to help inform some of those kind of resiliency kind of concepts and things moving forward. So I think we are thinking those more shorter term kind of things that could happen, but may also have long-term impacts as we kind of go through. And then beyond that, beyond the long range policy plan, one of the things I think ODOT's trying to move towards, and our MPO partners are doing this a lot too, is how do we provide real-time information to our travelers and who are using the system when we do have things that pop up. And there's a lot of work in this area. You probably heard the term big data maybe come up in policy board meetings and other things. ODOT, our MPO partners, I see many of them here on here, the technical staff, we continue to have those conversations about how can we leverage technology and data and information to provide information to the users in a more real-time fashion. There's just a lot of background stuff and a lot of things to put in place to make that effective. But I do think you will see more and more of that at the state level and definitely at the regional scale start to come online in the next number of years. I don't know, Tom, I don't know if there's anything Gloucester. I know Metro's looking at some of this. Paul Thompson down in Central Lane MPO. I think SCATS is also looking at some things. So really good question, Walt. And I hopefully you'll start to see some of that happen over these next number of years.
Thank you.
I also just think you're going to see it through emergency management, and I mean, where we are, fire, because we're looking at evacuation routes and those sorts of things as a result of the fire situation, and that brings in that phase as well. Okay, any other questions for Adam or Eric? If not, I'm going to move forward and move to the legislative priorities position paper. That's a draft that was sent out to all of us. And I think the purpose of that, it's been discussed at each of the MPOs. And I think we're trying to come up with a consensus to move to our lawmakers, legislative, to get this position paper to move forward. So if everybody has a copy of that, I don't know, Kelly, if you have it, if you want to put it on. There's a few changes or things that were discussed to add to the Oregon Metropolitan Planning Organizational Consortium transportation priorities. So we can move that forward. So if everybody sees that in front of you, I know there was a few things we're asking for support of the position paper. There was a few things under one, the robust fund multimodal transportation projects and planning. There was an ask to increase the maximum amount for grants for the raise and grant.
Yep, it's on my list.
So that was on a list of something that needed to be brought forward. So discussion, if somebody wants to say, Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I put on the left, I guess right side of the screen is the
okay, right, there it is. Bullet.
Yeah, these are the comments that we've received from the various MPOs about additions to the paper that was originally drafted. So they're here in front of you for your consideration.
Yes, and what I did is I kind of just jotted them down in the place on there where they were, so we could kind of start at the beginning, and go down through one first, which is, I think, brings us down to, which one is that? The raise is down below. I'm looking for number one, where the first adding to section 1 was. OMPOC encourages the policies and actions below, robustly fund multimodal transportation projects and planning. Somebody asked, they support increasing the grant information. I'm looking to see which one that is. Here it is, number 2, increase maximum grant amount for federal raise, rebuilding American infrastructure and sustainability. So I guess I'm bringing that up. And whoever championed it, if you would like to have something to add to that. Steve, was that you? I don't know.
Well, oh, no, I'm always waving around. Sorry. I can't find where you're talking about. Sorry.
Okay, well, this is what I did. If you take a look at, in here,
Number
do you
one?
have the, yeah, number 3 is what I'm looking at right now.
Oh, the one that's
So,
And I've highlighted both the
yes,
comment
thank you,
on the
Kelly.
right side and where it is on the paper on the left side of the screen. And this did come from the Central Lane MPO in recognition of these, I think the raised grant minimum, maximum, I'm sorry, right now is 20 million. And I think the comment was, you know, it's transportation costs are increasing quite a bit and 20 million doesn't get us that far anymore. So let's advocate for a raise in that amount.
And that is on my list here, to increase the maximum grant for raise program. So that's one of the things we
And
want
that's
to
what I'm
put.
pointing out to. So I was just going to ask
Okay.
whoever put it there if they wanted to champion that. I'm giving them that opportunity. We all know transportation's going up. So did they want to champion it and say, yes, we need to do that? Why?
Yes, we need to do that. I'm sorry. And
okay, so I guess maybe the thing to do, yes, go ahead, Tom. You said you would expand on that. Cluster.
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Councilor. Actually, that was just in general, if you had any questions about where Metro was, just because we don't have Councilor Craddock here today, I just want to make sure that you knew that we do support the general direction. We had made a few comments, but overall did support this.
Okay, great. All right, well, I was just highlighting those. So if there's anybody opposed to that, we'll just add that in there. Fund multimodal transportation projects through formula and just add in there, fund or increase multimodal transportation through formula funding. Would that do it? If we were just to add increase?
As long as it says increase.
Yeah, I said, is that good enough, Kelly? So I'm going to say that we do put an increase in that section. If I hear nothing other than that, and then I'm going to go the next one that I hold for.
Counselor?
Yes.
Counselor?
Yes.
Sorry, this is
Paul.
Thompson.
Yes.
No, I'm not sure increase gets to it, only because that could be read as increasing the overall national amount available within the program. And what they're talking about, what we are advocating for, is increasing the maximum award possible project.
So how, and I guess my question to you is, how do we add that? That's my question to you.
What I guess I would suggest is if the OMPOC members support the concept, staff can work on the wording.
Okay. All right. That's great.
Actually, the wording I have written down, increase the maximum grant for the raise program. My short sentences, so.
Okay.
So
is it okay?
If I may, Madam Chair, this is Carl.
Yes. Yes, Carl, please.
How about if we just say increase the maximum award per grant?
Okay.
Does that get it what you're looking for, Paul?
It does, Carl, and I was just trying to say that we can wordsmith this offline, but yes, that does.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess that's what I'm saying is I don't know exactly how to do this. I'm not the guru on this. And so I'm just basically saying, okay, help me out. Maybe the best thing I can add is if there's anybody opposed to wordsmithing this, in that way we could move forward. So if there's anybody who's opposed to that, speak now or forever hold it. So, okay. Then I'll move on to another one. Let's see, which was the next one on the next that I came across. I really felt strongly after number 2, what about the Buy American? That's something that I have seen a lot of problems with in the Safe Routes to School section. I know that put our school district at an absolute halt in terms of implementing Safe Routes to School, because there was absolutely no way we could financially do it or could do it, because there were no options available for us. And we even thought about the idea of trying to recycle or reuse bicycles, and that was totally thrown off. That no, it had to be new bicycles, it had to be bought in America, and it just literally stopped. the process. So I am very much in support of updating the wording on that to make it so that it is feasible, especially in smaller rural communities.
I suppose if you were to go out and look for that product you want, you can't find it here, then you have the option of going overseas. Because
Yes,
buying Americans is really important to me.
Oh, and I agree completely that it's important, but if it stops the process, and
Right.
another thing, you know, there's tons of bicycles and things that are out there or whatever we have that are recyclable. And to me, you know, that's part of being green, is reusing and recycling. And
Yeah.
I think that needs to be an option as well.
So a proposal, you could include language that basically says develop a streamlined process for exceptions to Buy America.
I like it. Yeah.
And Counselor,
Yes.
again, we may need to wordsmith this, but adding to what Darren just said, it may be streamlining it when it achieves other goals such as reduced emissions. I don't want to get too specific, but I know that part of this was from our area in the interest of being able to move forward with projects that are meeting other federal priorities or local or regional or state priorities, such as reducing emissions, and being blocked from doing that in the case of, for instance, cleaner school buses because of Buy America.
Yep.
The other comment I wanted to add real quick, I don't know if people saw it, but I think it was just this week or late last week that the Biden administration has actually proposed increasing the standard for Buy America. Currently, Buy America requires that 55% of the content be American, and the administration is proposing increasing that to 75% of the content must be American. So this could make it even more difficult.
Which is all the more reason to bring it up in terms of, I like that streamlining. And like I said, when we go along with the reuse and recycle, I cannot tell you how many bicycles are out there and how many, you know, we tried to redo a school bus in order to cart around safe routes to school, and we were told there was no way we could do that. And yet that to me was a green way to make the program work. So I don't know how to reword it, but I would really like to see something done there.
I think with this direction, we can work on wording it and finalizing it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So anybody opposed to that? All right, if that's the case, let's move on. The next one that I had was down under number 5, I believe. Provide funding for intercity intercommunication for smaller communities. I think most of us here will definitely say that is a must. Under section 5, that states provide funding to support the development of affordable, yes, intercity, intercommunity public transportation options to allow, yeah, because that goes right back to what we were talking about, the difference in the needs of the rural communities as opposed to the needs of the metro areas. And that needs to be put in there. It needs to be added for the sake of us smaller rural areas. So anybody have any wording they want to throw in there, or I like to add another bullet right there?
I would actually just, if I could, just add one comment there.
Yes.
So early on in the drafts on this, we, in our comments, we differentiated between rural and smaller, just because from the MPO perspective, rural could mean areas outside of MPOs. And we definitely agree with the word smaller. We have lots of smaller jurisdictions within the MPO. So that was just a clarification that we asked for.
Okay.
And if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Rural has a definition, especially when you start talking about federal funding. So we do want to use smaller, and we have to put a definition in for that in terms of either metropolitan statistical area size or city size or something to that effect, so that we are clear what we're talking about when we define rural. You might want to look at ODOT's definition and make sure that that's going to work for us, so at least we're compatible when we're asking for funding. I would recommend that we have that conversation with ODOT for making sure our definitions align. But yeah, rural, we found out that there were some very, very small jurisdictions that are considered not rural because they're within a metropolitan statistical area.
Yes.
And by any practical definition, they're definitely rural. They're physically isolated and so forth, but they're in an MPO or some MSA and they are not rural.
Yeah, I will
So
agree with you.
would
I think that,
agree with
yeah.
that,
Thank you, Mayor Clark. That was exactly
Yeah.
our concern. So that
And
clarifies our
basically,
concern.
inner city. Yeah.
And I would agree with this. I think I just threw out rural because that's a word that I've used, but I would agree with that. And I think we're a perfect example of that. We have Rogue River and Gold Hill in our MPO, and those are by all means smaller. So I would agree. So I'm going to throw that back to ODOT to say that make sure that the clarification is in there, but that it is in there. Once again, going to the fact that smaller areas have different needs than metro, but our needs need to be stated in this as well. So thank you, Kathy, for helping that definition part. Any other comments? All righty, so let's see. I'm trying to look at that another one that I had, provide funding. 6, ensure smaller MPOs needs included in policy. I think that's kind of the same thing that we were talking about right there. At a 6th priority, I guess after 5. So putting number 6, that goes right along with what I'm stating, that that our needs need to be included and we need to be spoken for. Any comments or anybody opposed to that? All right, and did I miss any of them? Which one did I miss? I did.
I don't know. This is Steve. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I just jumped in there.
Oh, that's fine.
And I'm not sure where it might be in here, but it was mentioned to be actually be able to use grants to purchase equipment. And that was brought up, so I wrote it down and I thought I would mention it.
Okay. And I guess I don't know the specifics of that. So if anybody else wants to add to that.
Well, I guess that's maybe covered in the Buy American Act. But anyway. Okay. Thank you.
I'm taking a look and I can't see it. I can't get to my email. The 5th one, the Rogue Valley, asking for the equity discussion. I don't know where it would be added, but.
The 5th one is on the first page, if I may,
Okay,
of
yes,
the document. It's number 3. It's a proposed rewording of that number 3.
Okay, which is it?
I'm sorry?
I'm just reading it on mine. It says, ensure that transportation investments support improved outcomes of everyone, particularly people of color. So you're saying that it needs to be reworded as you have it stated there, correct?
Right. This was a motion from the RV MPO. There was a great deal of discussion. And Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This kind of echoes verbiage in ODOT documentation for Title VI and environmental justice, I believe, to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion by identifying and addressing systemic barriers to ensure improved outcomes for everyone, particularly people of color who have been historically underinvested in or harmed by transportation funding and policy. So that just emphasizing more that this is to try and address some of the grievances that have been historically gone unmet for quite a while.
Yeah, Carl, this is Eric. I think that language is more in line with the equity definition that the state of Oregon has generally adopted. And I think, this is something you're putting together for legislative priorities and federal priorities. I think the wording is more important. Make sure it works for you. But yeah, if you want to tie it to more of the state verbiage, I think that's fine.
Okay, anybody opposed to that? All righty. If not, then we'll move on to the last one. Was the fourth page, and I don't know if I saw this one either, which the words maintain CMAQ support for both the RMPO and the RVMPO, recommend that the bullets. So yeah, because Carl, I'm going to have you explain that because I wasn't at the last
Okay.
meeting, and I know that that was something that was brought up. So if you want
So
to
it-
explain that one.
Under improved safety, the fifth bullet currently states maintain CMAQ support for attainment areas in order to ensure that these areas stay in attainment and do not jeopardize the health of current residents. Both MPOs strongly disagree with that. There's only one MPO that has reached attainment, and that's Portland. There are 4 MPOs that are still in non-attainment, and combined, we don't get as much as Portland does. And that strikes me as ludicrous. When we did this whole renegotiation of CMAQ to accommodate Eugene and Salem, Portland took an 11% hit. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the state gets about little over $17 million a year in CMAQ. Portland gets 11 point something of that. They're in attainment. They get the lion's share of CMAQ. The Middle Rogue MPO took a 32% hit to its mount, so they went from 650,000 to 450,000. The Rogue Valley took a 52% hit. And this is, in my mind, completely contrary to the reason we have CMAQ. It's meant to help those communities that are in non-attainment or struggling with congestion, which leads to air pollution, to try and meet the national ambient air quality standards. And again, I reiterate that the one area that's getting the lion's share of CMAQ dollars is in attainment and has been since October 2nd of 2017. So we would strongly urge that this bullet be stricken from this document. We cannot support that.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's kind of what I was thinking, but I wasn't at the end last time, and I knew you had a better language for it than I did. Tom has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in, and actually I'll have Ted jump in to help because this is his main forte. But I think the issue here, one is, yes, we're in attainment, but I was, by a thread. So we're hanging in there right now. But once you're in, doesn't mean you stay in. It means you stay in until you drop back out. And so we're watching, and that's one of our concerns in our region, just from an air quality standpoint. I think the issue here isn't so much how the funding divides up. We could talk about that all day. All MPOs that are getting CMAQ funds should be concerned that when you get to attainment, and other MPOs will, there have been proposals to cut off the funding, which if you think about it, you're putting that funding stream in to do things to improve air quality. And then you get to a magical line, and then you pull out the rug underneath those programs. So this has been our concern in our region. So this is one that we probably can't live with, because it's really important for really a lot of MPOs in the country that we don't take away support for all these things that we're doing to improve air quality, and in fact then drop us back out of attainment in many cases and have to go back to start again. So I don't think it's so much an issue about between the MPOs. I know Carl is calling out concerns for his MPO. No doubt all of us could use more CMAQ funding, but I'd encourage us to figure out a way to call out the issue that he's raising for the 2 Rogue Valley MPOs, but also not ignore this larger issue that when you get to attainment, you're at risk of actually losing the funding. I'm going to ask Ted to actually talk about this in terms of the detail of it.
Yeah, I don't know that I need to add much more than what Tom said. I think it really is just an eligibility issue. And when the original CMAQ formula was put together, the amount that came to the state of Oregon was really based on the populations of the areas that weren't in attainment and the severity, there was a formula around the severity of non-attainment that really contributed to what came to Oregon. That's now been changed, and really since two cycles of federal legislation ago, they just changed the formula, CMAQ formula, of what came to each state to what you received in previous formulas. However, if that changes back to a population-based formula and the Portland metro area is no longer, if the federal legislation changes so that the Portland area is no longer considered a part of what's not in attainment and then affects the formula of what comes to Oregon, that could just be a massive reduction of CMAQ money that comes to Oregon in the first place. And so that's why we had put that language, or suggested having that language, or supported having that language in there to begin with. It's not so much anything to do with how you divide the money once it comes to the state itself. So anyway, that's our pitch for why that language was included.
Well, so Ted, again, this is one that we have not briefed our OMPOC members on. So that was my main concern. Ted, I guess part of what I was going to ask you to maybe comment on is whether we can find out compromise wording. Again, when we've taken OMPOC positions in the past, it's been on the premise that these are consensus documents that we all agree. And so I'm hoping we can figure out a way to get at what Ted just said, which is we all have a stake in CMAQ. We want that funding to continue. We're commenting on it from the perspective of moving into attainment, moves it into being vulnerable for us. You know, we want to see all the MPOs be better funded with CMAQ. So if there's a way to say that and get at Ted's point that it's in all of our interest to make sure there aren't, you know, changes to the program that actually drop our overall fund down for the state, I think that's maybe the best way to get at it.
Yeah, agreed.
Carl, did you want to add to that, Carl?
No, we're just rehashing old grievances here.
Okay.
But sorry, I just, it seems to defy logic that again, the division of the funding goes to the largest city that is not violating NACs.
And you know, I'm from down here as well, Carl, and I would agree. I mean, we took a hit. I mean, we definitely took a hit when we added Salem in, and you know, that has created some, and thus we put in the need to ensure smaller MPOs' needs are met. I mean, obviously those are being put in as a result of that urban-rural divide, or whatever you want to call it. It's there, it's a reality. So I don't know whether the point is, we don't want the money to be decreased to the state. There's no doubt about it. But we would just like to make sure that somewhere in there, when it's divided up, that, you know, that is addressed somewhere. And I'm not sure where the best way to get that addressed.
Counselor?
Yes, Paul?
You know, Carl's right, Ted's right, Tom's right, and it is rehashing old arguments that were difficult over a number of years. And I'm just, you know, I understand the attainment, non-attainment argument, but I also am concerned that if we set a precedent that we're not giving CMAQ money to attainment areas, that we're going to go down the road that Tom and Ted highlighted, which is getting less money in the state overall because Portland no longer is part of the formula. That's worded very poorly or very at a high level, but I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see the state receive less money overall. I also believe, and Eric, maybe you can help, but I also believe I saw a notice just within the past couple of weeks that we're going to have to enter a whole new round of CMAQ allocation discussion. I'm pretty sure I saw an email about that, and Eric, maybe you don't.
No, there was a heads up, Paul, but it's a maybe, and it's really dependent on the census.
Well, yeah, and so I'm just wondering, you know, I understand that there's 2 MPOs objecting to this bullet, that Metro really wants the bullet in. Compromise language might be hard to find today. I'm just wondering if removing the bullet and not having a statement at all is detrimental to Metro given that when it comes to the actual CMAQ discussions, if they are reopened, you certainly could advocate for your position there.
I would agree with that, Paul, or a compromise would be that we would strongly urge Congress to increase the amount of CMAQ funding available to the states based on current populations, or how just increase CMAQ funding.
And Carl, the email I have from Jeff Flowers just 10 days ago says ODOT will be restarting CMAQ discussion in the very near future for 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, they're assuming we're going to hit TMA status. I'm not so sure that's going to happen.
Yeah, it doesn't mention that as a condition though.
Okay, I'm just going to say, is there anybody else who wants to chime in? Any of the other ones? Any of the other regions?
Well, as a neutral observer, I guess I'm not clear on why we couldn't say something along the lines of increase CMAQ support while maintaining support for attainment areas, something like that.
Sounds like a compromise to me. It does, and that's basically what I'm looking for. I mean, I don't think any of us wants to slow this down. I think we just want to. I think Carl's just trying to making a point, and I'm supporting him in that point. So, thank you for that, Darren. Any other comments?
I guess I would jump in again, since we don't have a representative here for the board. I think what Darren said sounds good. I think there's two things going on. We had a really difficult process to divide up a fund that was too small, basically. So it cut into both the Rogue Valley and MPO and CMAQ funds for our region as well. Granted, we have a larger fund, but it definitely cut into ours as well. And so that was awkward and uncomfortable. Everybody hated it. I think in this piece, we're trying to set out a statement of priorities. And to me, we should be careful. And again, trying to stay consistent with what we presented to Councilor Craddock. We should be careful not to try to think about how we're going to divide the funds, but instead talk about the problem statement, which is we have inadequate funds. And this is a really solid program. It definitely has air quality benefits that all of us in the TMAs are concerned about. And so I think if there's a way to say this, and as well as you should reward not only folks who are trying to get to the finish line, but keeping them above the finish line. That's the thing about CMAQ. When you hit that line, all of the cars with exhaust pipes don't just go away magically overnight. They're still out there. So that's been our argument for a sustaining program, because you're really trying to keep air quality at that point. So I think if there's a way we can talk about CMAQ supporting those goals and better funding it, we'd be all in favor of that as well, because that's what we're all kind of saying in the big picture. I agree. Kathy, did you want to add to that?
I add just a little bit as one of the two jurisdictions that was cut out of CMAQ until we had that, as Tom very artfully put it, very difficult conversation. All of us that are receiving these funds are making the maximum use out of it. I like Darren's compromised language. It is a very important program. It is severely underfunded and it has tremendous benefits to every single MPO that receives those funds and maximizes what we do with them. So I think the larger picture to encourage the federal government to look at that one as a program worth funding and expanding and not cutting off at the knees, the ones who have just barely crossed the line. Okay, good enough, off you go. It's a lot like a lot of federal programs. Just as you get a little bit airborne, a little bit air under your wings, they pull out all of the supports, and then you have to start over again. So to Tom's point, the sustaining of their programs that are producing results be appropriate. But I think it's also important to look at programs that may have outlived their usefulness or may need to be modified. I think that that's a very fair conversation to have as well.
Which I think is what we've talked about when you're talking about disinvestment. There comes a time where you do need to stop and think and say, where have we gotten the best bang for our buck and what works, what doesn't? So, all Are you okay with the language, Carl? I'm going to leave that up to you with Darren's.
What is the language that's being proposed? That's
Okay. Did you, Kelly, get it specific? I'm asking Kelly because she's our note taker. Kelly?
I don't know if I have it specific. I'll go back to the recording, but what I'm gathering is to encourage the increase of funding amounts of CMAQ while maintaining support for attainment areas.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. Increase and maintain support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good job. Kathy,
Thank
did
you
you want
all.
to add something? Oh, no, that was a thumbs up. Okay, great. No, I feel good about that. So anything else for the order on this transportation priority bill, paper?
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but I'm not sure that Carl weighed in on whether or not he's okay with that.
I saw his head nodding, but go ahead. You're right.
Well, I mean,
assume-
the two electeds, both my chairs are on, Valerie and Jim. So
Mhm.
they are the board members.
Yeah. And I would say, just as you said, I understand that even if you get attainment, I know how governments work, they yank the funds, and I don't want it to go away for the benefit of the whole state. So I get that, but I also think that we needed to make a point. So Kathy, hands up. You're still muted, Kathy.
There we go.
There.
Okay. I got thrown off my Zoom for a little bit, so this may have already been addressed. And I'm not sure where this language was in the document. I was having a hard time seeing it. The multimodal operationality, what the discussion we had at our MPO was making sure that as we're doing any sorts of changes, updates to one mode, really look at the interoperability where one is where they can work together, or where our standards for one may actually be hindering another. Where we constantly run into problems is the design standards around sidewalks and bike lanes. We're always trying to look at how can we build something that is not attached to the road but is parallel. Because I don't know about you, but riding my bicycle next to motor vehicles is a no-go. I just won't do it, and a lot of people won't. So I end up getting run down on the sidewalk by cyclists. It's a real special feeling. So we want to design, we have designs, there's things we want to do, and because of antiquated standards and antiquated definitions, we can't do the really cool stuff that we all know we can do. So the multimodal operationality and interoperability is going to continue to be a really big thing, especially as cities like mine are doing urban upgrades, and we want to be very comprehensive in those projects. So I don't know where that is in the language. I don't know if it got in there or you already talked about it, and I'm behind. So there you go. There's my soapbox. I'm off.
I'm just going to jump on really quick, and I'm going to go back to Jim, because I know I'm going to go back to, because I didn't get confirmation where Jim felt Lewis from Rogue Valley MPO, whether he was happy with the language update.
Well, I suspect that this is an issue that we're going to continue to agree to disagree. I'm not personally uncomfortable with the language preferred by, I'm sorry, I forgot the gentleman's name.
Darren.
Darren, yes. I think for this moment, this day, we can maybe rest there and continue to consider it. Carl, I don't know if I've stabbed you or not, but.
No, no, I'm fine, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Okay.
That does it for me, I think.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for weighing in. And I agree. So I think at this point in time, we're talking Oregon statewide. And so I think we need to let that rest. And I'm going to just go back on the multimodal under number 5, where it has support multimodal projects that combine transit system improvements alongside significant safety and access improvements. I don't know if that is addressing what you were concerned about, Kathy, or whether you want something more specific in there.
Well, it was really calling out transit and yes, that interoperability from transit to passenger vehicle to bike pads and so forth, or whatever else we want to do. But I really didn't feel that it addressed designs that actually hinder our ability to do multimodal interoperability. And that gets back to the conversation when we're doing urban upgrades, we have antiquated designs that actually keep us from doing things that are actually safer. It's because, well, you can only spend your money within this amount of right of way or something like that. And I think that we really need to have that conversation about letting us come up with more modernized and safer designs than the old stuff where just paint a stripe down the road, that's good enough for the cyclist. Are you kidding me?
So I just have a comment for Kathy on that, and maybe ODOT can weigh in better than I can, but some of the hindrances that we have related to bike and ped and the right-of-way are related to state law and state highway funds, that more so than federal. And so that's a conversation that probably is challenging because of the Constitution in Oregon, but also more of a local conversation.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I,
Eric's comment.
go, Tom, do you have your hand up? Did you want to add to that? Or
Actually, just more broadly, and I guess I'll just toss it in since we're getting close to the end. I just wanted to, I said it in chat, but because Councilor Craddock isn't here today, and because for these position pieces, we asked for consensus among all of the MPOs, I wanted to just restate that we've reviewed this. If Councilor Craddock was here, she'd be supporting this. Ted and I are doing our best to kind of track these language changes. We think these are consistent with where she was as well. So I think, I'm hoping under the bylaws, that's okay, but wanted to just make sure everybody knew that we do support this.
thank you for that, Tom. And I will say, Kathy, I think I totally get what you're saying. I really do understand. And I think that does come underneath the whole safety thing and safe routes to school, and it can be addressed, but I don't think this is necessarily the place to put it. And that's just my thought. Yeah, you know, like I said, the discussion is there. Rick Riker, if he's still on here, he's been going for multimodal for years down here. But what we find out over and over again is if we want anything, we have to basically go for what financially we can do. Right away is a huge thing down here constitutionally. And, you know, that's the first thing that's going to kill many of our projects is if we have to try to take land. So like I said, that's a huge issue that I feel comfortable with where we've got in the, where we are in this position paper, sending it forward. So I'm going to look for a motion, but I don't disagree, Kathy. That's a discussion that needs to be ongoing.
Well, then I would move approval of the legislative, what you call it?
The transportation priorities 2021.
Yep.
Second.
And that's with the amendments that we discussed, correct?
As amended.
Okay, thank you. Is all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Thumbs up. Anybody opposed? Okay, so there we go. Made some progress. That's great. So I feel good about it. Lots of discussions moving forward. Lots of things still coming down the road with transportation, obviously. Anyway, so are we going to do roundtable? It's 12 o'clock right now, 12:05. Looking at my.
Madam Chair, if I may,
yes,
perhaps we could wrap up. Eric has not given his update for ODOT. That might be of no offense to anyone, more interest to everyone than what we're doing individually.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So you're right. I saw the second page. So let's go for this, a quick ODOT ODOT update from Eric. And if everybody's okay with that, we will just push the roundtable update out. Okay, looks like it's a thumbs up. So go ahead, Eric, give us your update.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to go very quick because I'm keeping people from lunch in their afternoon. So I'm going to cut my list just to 2 items. Want to make sure that this group is aware that ODOT is about to release a new round, a competitive round of the Connect Oregon program. We've been looking at the amount of money coming in from the privilege tax, and while it was a little touch and go, it does look like we will have the minimum we need to have a program. So that's going to start and be released, I believe, in September, but more coming in the next number of weeks on the schedule. Just as a reminder, Connect Oregon has been modified by the 2017 and 2019 legislative session to really only be aviation, marine, and rail. Transit and bicycle pedestrian types of investments were taken out of the Connect Oregon program and moved into those other modal topic areas. But for those jurisdictions that want to work with providers around rail connectivity, marine and aviation kind of projects, there are opportunities for Connect Oregon coming here very soon. The last one, and I hate to bring this up, but I shared this with all of your MPO staff. We are at that decennial census time, and we expect some of the initial results to be made available in, I believe, October or November. At that point, we're going to know if the state of Oregon has any potential new MPOs or not. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but that does trigger a bunch of things that we have to coordinate between ODOT, our MPO staffs, and FHWA primarily, but some FTA. And primarily that's going to be updating any kind of boundary issues and adjustments that come out of that census, federal functional classification reviews to make sure we have the classification systems corrected up. And then really the big one is, and we've got a little bit of this in the CMAQ, but we will have to bring people together and talk about the planning, the PL funding, and the 5303 transit planning funding agreement and funding formula. I think that's served us actually fairly well for the last number of years. Again, there's nothing perfect. It comes back to Carl's point. There's just not enough money in the kitty to do everything, but we will engage that conversation too. So just want to make sure everybody's aware that it's that time of the process again. So expect something coming up early in 2022 to get that going. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll just hit those as two of the highlights for ODOT updates. And if there's questions, I can get to other topics.
Okay, I just had a question. Originally, it was August, right? And that just recently moved to October, November, am I correct? The census update?
Well, the stuff I saw from FHWA said fall is when the census website would be updated. So I never heard August myself, but it doesn't mean that that wasn't original and then moved back.
Okay, great. That seems like it was, but that's fine. I had heard it moved. So any questions? Anybody have anything? I'm looking for hands. I'm not seeing any hands. I think everybody's hungry and ready to go. I know my back's tired of sitting here. So yeah, and like I said, with all the changes and things, I think that putting off the roundtable will be fine, and we'll find out what more is coming down the pike here before our next meeting, which will be, but when is our next meeting, Kelly? It'll be July, August, September, end of October, November. And maybe we'll have a lot of those.
Sorry, I should have had that. It's October 29th.
Okay, so yeah, so I have a feeling that a lot of these loose ends will kind of be tied up by that point, and maybe we can move forward. I will remind people that earlier on when we had the railroad discussion, we did talk about sending in specifics, things that are kind of on hold for you and your community because of issues with railway, so that when we do get somebody here from the railway, they have a chance to look at some of those ahead of time and kind of get, anyway, give them a heads up. So anything else from the order or needs to be discussed? If nothing else, I don't see any hands. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
At 12:12. And I thank you all for being here.